This is a story of two letters in history that had the potential of changing the history of the Christian world and possibly of the whole world. Both the letters reached their destinations, but both failed to achieve their desired outcomes. But before we get to our story of these two monumentally historic letters, which caused the greatest missed opportunity for Christianity that could have altered the whole map of the Christendom, if you are new to our channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to remain updated with our latest uploads. With getting that out of the way, let's proceed with our subject at hand, the greatest opportunity ever missed. What was this missed opportunity and how it impacted the spread of Christianity around the world? Before we get to that, we need to take a peek at the historical background to the circumstances surrounding the writing of the two fateful letters. First, the one written by a pope to a Mongol emperor, and the second written by a Mongol emperor to a pope, both within a span of around 3 decades. But who were these Mongol emperors anyway? Both of the emperors belonged to the greatest dynasty of one of the most feared and dreaded men in the history of mankind, none other than Genghis Khan, also rightly known as the Terror of the World. Genghis Khan, born Temujin Borjigin, 1162, also officially Genghis Khan Huangdi, was the founder and the first Great Khan, the emperor of the Mongol Empire, which became the largest connecting empire in history after his death in 1227. Centuries later, the empire split into 4 major dynasties, the last being the Turco-Mughal Empire that ended in India in the 1858. Genghis Khan's empire was the biggest in world history up to his time. The Great Khan controlled almost 1/3 of Asia. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, making it bigger than the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. Interestingly, Beijing, which is now the capital of China, then called Cathay, was established as the capital of China and the whole Mongol Empire by Genghis Khan himself. Trailing Genghis Khan's descendancy came his grandson, Emperor Guyak, the third Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Emperor Guyak reigned from 1246 to 1248. Since many European states could not resist the vicious onslaught of Guyak, they humbly surrendered before him, seeing his advances towards Europe and the fear of the whole Christendom being wiped out. Pope Innocent IV made a rather strange and wishful plea to Guyak, not only to cease and desist from his unbridled ambitions of taking over the whole of Europe and the Christendom of the time, but also invited the emperor to embrace Christianity. Guyak, who had little consideration of a faraway Europe, Christianity, or the Pope's status, not only did reject the advice, but to the contrary demanded the Pope's submission and a visit from the rulers of the West to pay homage to Mongol power. In response to the Pope's letter, Guyak wrote, "You must say with a sincere heart, 'We will be your subjects, we will give you our strength.' You must in person come with your kings, altogether, without exception, to render us service and pay us homage. Only then we will acknowledge your submission, and if you go against our orders, we will consider you as our enemy." Letter from Guyak to Pope Innocent IV, 1246. Only 2 years later, Guyak's rule ended with his death in 1248. Over a couple of decades later comes our second important character of the story, the great Kublai Khan. Emperor Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty in 1271. He had Guyak Khan placed on the official records as Dingzong. Kublai Khan is said to be the most sophisticated, a man of great finesse and finest taste of all Mongol emperors. Kublai Khan's massive empire covered over 9 million square miles of territory, making it the largest contiguous land empire in world history. Kublai Khan can be said to be the most modern emperor, as he promoted and patronized many scientific works and inventions. The paper money that was introduced in the West in the late 18th century was already in use in Kublai Khan's empire. Kublai Khan was also a very tolerant man in the matters of religion. In this very context, Kublai Khan became deeply interested in Christianity. But how did that happen? For this, we will need to go to our next most important character or characters of this story, and they are the Polos of Venice, Italy, namely Marco Polo, his father Niccolo Polo, and his uncle Maffeo Polo. The Polos set on their expeditions to the east in 1271. At this time, Marco Polo was only 17 years old. After a very arduous and trying journey by sea and land, the Polos finally reached the kingdom of the Great Khan. Kublai Khan was greatly impressed by these three Christian explorers from Rome. He appointed Marco Polo official over several of his kingdom's entities. Marco learned 4 Oriental languages to serve in the emperor's vast kingdom. After serving in the kingdom of the great emperor for 17 long years, the Polos finally decided to return to their homeland, Venice. Kublai initially refused to let the Polos return home as he appreciated their company and they became very valuable to him. However, around 1291, he finally granted them permission, entrusting the Polos with their last duty, and that was to accompany the Mongol princess Kokuchin, who was to become the consort of Arghun Khan in Persia. After leaving the princess, the Polos traveled overland to Constantinople before finally returning to Venice in 1295. People of their land did not believe a word that the Polos told them about the world they had seen. Therefore, the natives of Venice called the book of travels written by Marco Polo as a book of million lies. But our story doesn't end here. As a matter of fact, it begins here. Before making their final journey back home, Emperor Kublai Khan had asked the Polos to go back and bring 100 missionaries and holy oil from the tomb of Jesus in Jerusalem. He had expressed his desire to be baptized and to see the message of the gospel preached all across his vast empire, stretching from the rising of the sun to the setting thereof. That is, from east to west. Kublai Khan wrote a letter to the Pope of that time, but the seat of the Pope then was vacant, and there was no Pope in Christendom. This was something that troubled the Polos while journeying back home, as they were the couriers of the letter to a recipient who was not there. However, after 33 months of vacationing, they finally received the news that the conclave had elected the new Pope, and that he was Archdeacon of Acre in Israel. The 3 of them hurried to return to the Holy Land where the new Pope had taken the office. They handed him the letter from the emperor. Pope was flabbergasted and thrilled at the emperor's request. He arranged for 2 Dominican fathers included in the 100 missionaries to return with the Polos. However, fearing the hardships and perils of the arduous journey, only 2 of the missionaries reached the emperor's court with the Polos. Marco Polo by this time had reached the prime age of 21. What were the consequences of this failure? The most historic opportunity to win China and all the vast empire under Kublai Khan, stretching over 9 million square miles from Asia to Europe, literally from east to west for Jesus, was lost. Remember, about 3 decades earlier, fearing the total wipeout of the Christendom, Pope Innocent IV had written to the Mongol Shah Guyak to embrace Christianity. The Mongol emperor had shunned the invitation with utter disdain and contempt. And here, within the same century, a Mongol emperor sends a letter of invitation to the Christian world to bring the message of the gospel to him and his empire, and Christians fail to seize the golden opportunity, an opportunity that could have shaped the whole world, particularly the Christian world, in a very different way. China, which now inflicts severest persecution on Christians, would now be an enormous Christian nation, and not only China, but much of Asia and the whole wide world. By the time the other missionaries arrived in Eastern Asia in 1294, Kublai Khan's interests had shifted to Buddhism. Today, most of Far East and China are followers of Buddhism and Confucianism. Centuries later, another attempt by the Jesuits to reach China was made in 1552 by Saint Francis Xavier, a priest and missionary and founding member of the Society of Jesus. Many Chinese, including former Confucian scholars, adopted Christianity and became priests and members of the Society of Jesus. From 1552, the death of Saint Francis Xavier, to 1800, a total of 920 Jesuit priests participated in the mission to China. Among them, 314 were Portuguese and 130 French. In 1844, China was estimated to have 240,000 Roman Catholics. In 1901, the figure reached 725,000 Christians/Catholics. Many Jesuit priests, both Western-born and Chinese, are buried in the cemetery located in what is now the School of the Beijing Municipal Committee. The first Protestant missionary to China, Robert Morrison, traveled there in 1807 on behalf of the London Missionary Society and translated the Bible into Mandarin. In 2010, the Pew Research Center calculated 68 million Christians in China, or approximately 5% of the country's population of over 1.4 billion. Other independent estimates suggest the figures to be between 100 to 130 million. The number of Chinese Protestants has grown by an average of 10% annually since 1979. Purdue's Yang projected that if these growth rates are sustained, China could have as many as 160 million Christians by 2025 and 247 million by 2030, making it the country with the largest Christian population in the world. Today, America stands with the highest population of Christians with over 250 million. China has witnessed a religious revival over the past 4 decades, in particular with a significant increase in Christian believers. Today, we can remember the 2 fateful letters, 2 popes and the 2 Mongol emperors, the former threatening to wipe out Christianity and the latter requesting for Christian missionaries and expressing his desire to be baptized. Both letters failed to produce the desired outcome, but today we may look back and rue the lost opportunities, especially the one involving Kublai Khan and the Polos. We might be inclined to lay the blame on the 98 of the 100 missionaries who out of their fears turned back, leaving only 2 who finally made it to the emperor's court. How about us? How brave are we to share Jesus with others? Our neighbors, our colleagues, or a friend, a stranger, anyone. Our culture of political correctness, the so-called social norms, fear of rejection, and a desire of being liked as a progressive or liberals, broad-minded, pluralistic, and so on, all bars us from sharing anything to everything with everyone but Jesus. Are we terrified like the 98, or are we ashamed of sharing our faith with others? Today, we don't necessarily have to go to China, India, Middle East, or to any nation to share Jesus. They're all here in our neighborhoods and around us everywhere. Are we bold enough to talk to them about Jesus, or are we like the 98 who decided to turn back? Remember, the 12 disciples of Jesus did not turn back, and they won millions of souls for the Lord, traveling in the most remote and dangerous and uncharted territories of the world. 10 of the first 12 disciples of Jesus faced gruesome martyrdom, but did not turn back, and because of them today we know the Lord. Again, look back at our story of the 2 letters and at the fateful turning back of the 98 missionaries. We might do well to ask ourselves, how many times have I turned back when it comes to sharing Jesus?